pretending to be interested in Lawrence Ferlinghetti and Allen Ginsberg, and talking about smoking dope but not doing it.
It was in about 59, which is at the time I first came across Sid, or as he was still almost then, Roger Barrett. And we used to go down to Grantchester Meadows on punts and a picnic. This was, of course, just prior to the arrival of pot. And when eventually that came our way, we were delighted. My first memories of Sid really were of this sparky, prince-like elfin creature. A very, can I say, beautiful young man. And we knew he was a poet, an artist, a painter, and beginning to play guitar.
Cambridge, like many British cities of the time, was enlivened by a thriving music scene.
We used to go down to his mother's house on Hills Road of a Sunday afternoon, and there would be jamming sessions.
I can remember sitting around and playing acoustic guitars with him in Cambridge.
Roger was at the jam sessions in Hills Road, and it's interesting because Sid's real name was Roger Barrett and Roger Waters, both called Roger, both had lost their fathers. And I think this really, really brought them very close together.
I remember when Sid went out and bought a Futurama 3, you know, red sort of plastic guitar. Whereas before that, people had been fiddling around with acoustic guitars. And Sid, I remember particularly, you know, would learn to play Apache.
Syd Barrett, the legendary founder of the Pink Floyd sound, was to become one of the most heavily mythologized men in rock.
I found Sid very inspiring, and he has a sort of fairy-like quality about him. And he turned heads. He really did turn heads.
Even at the age of 14, 15, a sort of charismatic figure that people would sort of point at and talk about because he had some sort of magnetism.
I thought, wow, that's so beautiful. He's so lovely, and he looked like your sort of archetypal doomed poet. He had these wonderful violet eyes and messy black hair, and he was slender, and he wore interesting clothes, and he didn't say a lot, and it was my mission to soothe his fevered brow. It wasn't till later, though, that I managed to get on my own with him and actually make him notice me in that way.
He just was very, you know, a bright light on the scene, and I'm sure most people, including myself, had certain jealousies of how what a bright light he appeared to be.
I don't know why, but we always had this notion that when we hit London, because London was the Mecca and that was where one had to be, and that we would start a band together.
By 1966, a new underground scene was emerging. Following 2 decades of post-war austerity, the economy was booming. Idealism and optimism were rife.
In this King's Road that London is lumbered with stands, just, a collation known as the Antique Supermarket, and antiques can mean clothes. This lady's time machine is headed for the flapper world of the 20s, doubtless a trip many a time traveller would love to take. One way of saying no to authority is to parody it. Some of the young, with little to say yes to, come to Soho, that pulsating heart of swinging London where girls join clubs to see old men strip. Or is it vice versa? And at the cutely named I Was Lord Kitchener's valet, by uniforms of the past to affront the uniformity of the present.
Everything was happening, and it was the Beatles and Sergeant Pepper and All You Need Is Love. We were in the heart of it, and it was amazing, very exciting.
That period of the 60s was a very unique time. You know, you look at the great year from the summer of 66 through the summer of 67, which is the time of the most wonderful ferment and activity.
World's End means where the King's Road ends, which shows what the King's Roaders think of themselves. Granny Takes a Trip, the shop behind the face calls itself, and it's typical of the non-typical, conforming to the non-conformist image of the inn. What they used to call way out, and before that with it, and before that groovy, and before that hep, and what Granny herself would have called the very latest thing, my dear.
There is this whole idealised sort of, I don't know, concept of the 60s. Some of it's true and some of it isn't.
The temptation when thinking about the middle 60s is to think of it in terms of drug culture, not just sex, drugs and rock and roll, but everybody was gone on LSD, and, you know, there was sex on the hour, every hour, and, you know, I mean, the whole thing must have been totally exhausting, if that were true. Self-evidently, it wasn't true.
Roger Waters, Rick Wright and Nick Mason met during the first year of an architectural course in London.
Nick Mason and Roger Waters were at Regent Street Poly together, and like many people, they were inspired to form a band.
It went through a period where it was really a sort of Regent Street Poly house band almost, where all the rehearsals took place at college.
There were various incarnations and names. They had the Screaming Abdabs, Sigma 6, the T-Set, Megadeths. There were a couple of other characters involved. Keith Noble and Clive Metcalf were in early lineups.
I mean, I suppose the sort of start of the band was with Sid and Bob, and Rick and myself and Roger.
A couple of them made the big move to London. They had a place at Stanhope Gardens, and Sid turned up there one day.
By the time he arrived, I was already playing with a few other people, so he kind of joined in.
He was living with a whole sort of community of people who were very much believing, rather like Timothy O'Leary, that, you know, acid can release you and, you know, get to the truth.
He lived in a place called 101 Cromwell Road. That was just a haven of acid. People were just dropping it in people's tea without telling. It was really too much. I liked to know when I was taking my acid.
101 Cromwell Road, we lived with Sid for a while. There were probably 5 or 6 of us, and I was the only woman.
David describes 101 as a hip salon where the great and the good would come and hang out. The American beats like Allen Ginsberg.
People like Mick Jagger, Marianne Faithfull, PJ Proby.
And the early Pink Floyd.
Every night was a party, really.
People were tripping and the house was full of beautiful women.
We would take LSD and we painted our faces. It was quite mad.
Lysergic acid diethylamide 25, LSD, came our way. And I'll tell you this, it was legal. Turn on, tune in, and drop out.
The message is very simple. 6 words. Turn on, tune in, drop out.